I'm Sally Ann Hart, and of course many of you know that. I know I don't look like the learned professor who usually opens these meetings, but my dear husband is probably having the beginning of a man cold, which means he could be sick in bed for 4 or 5 weeks, moaning and groaning. So right after this, I'll go home and make hot soup for him. Our guest today needs very little introduction based on the number of hugs I saw her sharing with everybody in here. A lot of people know Mary. We've been talking in the last weeks about education, a lot about education, and I think Mary is a big fan of public schools. And we know that we're seeing in the news all the time that public schools are having a lot of competition with charter schools and other things. But Mary has been head of PACE, and she has done the kind of work, I call these people the Mother Teresas in our world. We may not be able to solve all the problems of the world, but we can certainly tackle it one human being at a time. And that's what Mary is doing for young women. And this introduction is going to be extremely brief because, one, she needs no introduction, and two, she's going to tell us everything we need to know about PACE. I would like her to start by telling a little bit about herself, because I think we know about PACE. I know she went to Reed College in Oregon, which is a long way to go from New York City. So I'd like to hear a little bit about her educational experience since we've been dealing with things like critical race theory, etc. So welcome to Mary Martz, and thank you to her parents for having given birth to this wonderful woman. And thank you to Joan Grander and Gordon West for telling us about Mary. That's how we learned about her. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much.
We'll give her a big hand.
And it's nice to see so many familiar faces in the room, so appreciate all of you coming, and hi to my parents. So a little bit about me. So as Sue said, I grew up in New York, went to college at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, which is a small liberal arts college. And while I was attending college, I majored in biology, and I was going to be a doctor. And so prior to going to medical school, I decided to work in a laboratory, and so I worked at the University of California at San Francisco. I worked in the laboratory as an assistant research faculty for Dr. Harold Varmus, who ended up winning the Nobel Prize in 1989. So it was really the best and the brightest students in the country who were working in his lab, and it was while working in his lab that I realized I wasn't as interested in the small cells and looking through the microscope. I was actually interested in the bigger systems and the systems of communities and how people interacted with each other. So I made a very difficult decision at the height of the biotech industry when I told my father that I was leaving my job, and he thought, oh, you're going to go work for a biotech startup. And I said, no. I'm going into the lucrative field of children's art. So I started a children's art museum in Oakland, California, and ran that for about 15 years. And then when my parents moved here to Ponte Vedra, right when my son was born, I thought, it's a resort with a babysitter, we should move there. So we did. So we moved here in 2003, and I ran the Ponte Vedra Cultural Center for 3 years, and then through my father, Jim, who was volunteering at PACE, I was introduced to PACE and Nina Waters, who I know Jim Van Vleck is here, and is a very good friend of, and Nina showed me what PACE was doing, and I remembered it, and eventually I started working there. And so I started there as the Vice President of Government Affairs, which meant that I primarily worked with the Florida legislature, and so I started there in 2007, and then in 2010, they asked me to become the CEO. So I've been the CEO since 2010. When I started, we had about 200 employees and worked with about 1,000 girls, and we're now have over 500 employees, work with over 3,500 girls a year. And we went from a budget that was about 12 million to a budget that right now is about 50 million. So it's been a large period of growth over the last decade. And I've loved every minute of it because I get to work with these beautiful young women. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about PACE. And if we can have a conversation, I would be more than happy. So at any time, feel free to stop me, raise your hand if there's something you want to ask. I'd be happy to do that. So PACE Center for Girls, I'm going to hopefully do this correctly. Josh has been great. Yes, there it is. Thank you. So we've been in existence since 1985. So for more than 35 years, we have addressed really complex social change for girls and young women. And these are primarily girls who have experienced histories of trauma. And so when we talk about trauma, we're talking about things like grief and loss. We have lots of the girls that we work with who's have one or both parents who have been deceased, that have experienced violence in their home, sometimes violence in their community, sometimes physical violence personally, sometimes sexual violence personally. So there's a lot of trauma that these girls have been experiencing. And trauma has a lot of impact on girls. So what you can see on the slide on your left, that is our original group of girls, the original 10 girls from 1985. So those young women are probably in their 40s now. So we were founded in 1985 by Vicki Burke, and Vicki Burke lived here in Jacksonville. And what she noticed was that there was a growing number of girls in the 80s who were being arrested. They were going into the juvenile justice system. And what was driving them into that system was these histories of trauma. They needed services. They didn't need to be incarcerated, but there wasn't anything that existed for them. There were no services that were designed for girls. And PACE quickly became the only intervention that was available to girls. And it grew quickly. It was very popular with the juvenile judges because the juvenile judges did not want to arrest these girls. They wanted to help them, and they wanted to keep them safe. So the way PACE quickly spread is the juvenile judges would see that was successful in Jacksonville. So in Gainesville, they were like, we need that. And then in Tallahassee, we need that. So quickly, it grew in the 90s. And so the idea was really to prevent them from entering this juvenile justice system in the first place. So working with those original 10 girls in 1985 in a church basement in Schneider Memorial Church in downtown Jacksonville, we now work in 26 communities across 2 states. And we've changed the life trajectory of more than 40,000 girls over the course of these 35 plus years. And we work with about 3,500 girls every year. So right now we're working in Florida and Georgia. I just came back from South Carolina, where we'll be opening 2 programs in South Carolina. And in 2022, we'll also be opening programs in Massachusetts. So we are becoming multi-state. So I talked a bit about trauma, and I want to talk a little bit about the impact of trauma. So trauma impacts girls' thinking, it impacts their behavior, it impacts their physical and mental health, and it impacts their overall well-being. And what happens as a result is it can create lifelong economic dependency. So you're seeing generational cycles, intergenerational cycles of poverty and violence as a result of trauma. It can result in dropping out of school. It can result in poor health and mental health. It can result in involvement in systems like the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system. And unfortunately, it also puts girls at risk for human trafficking. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the scourge of human trafficking. So we want to prevent all that from happening. So what works with girls? What are the systems that will really help the girls to be successful? And research has shown, and there's been a lot of research done on this, that there really are 3 pillars that work with girls when you think about how to provide a set of services to help them be successful. And these 3 pillars have been the foundation of PACE's model for its 35 years. So the first pillar is what's called a gender-responsive approach. And what does that mean? It means that we have to look at the whole girl and everything that surrounds her so that we can help her be successful. We need to provide an environment that's physically and emotionally safe. Safety is paramount, especially for girls who have experienced trauma. We need to take a holistic approach to the girl rather than a reductionist medical model. And so I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So when your dentist is treating you, they're treating your teeth and your gums. And so that's a reductionist medical model. When you look at a holistic model, they would be treating the person that the gums and the teeth are attached to. So it's really looking at the whole entity. What's also really important, especially to girls and young women, is that it's relationship-based, that there needs to be healthy relationships healthy, productive relationships with both adults, but also with their peers. And in many cases, our girls haven't really seen a healthy relationship modeled. In fact, one of the young women that I met at PACE Jacksonville told me it wasn't until she came to PACE that she didn't realize your boyfriend or your husband wasn't supposed to hit you. That wasn't something she knew. So it's really important that we help them to understand and develop a healthy relationship. We focus on their strengths, being strength-based. Everybody's got their strengths rather than what are their deficits. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And then finally, we pay strong attention to their health and their mental health. So at most of our centers, we actually have a health clinic embedded in the center. The second pillar is that we're trauma-informed. So we talked about the impact of trauma on thinking and behavior. So it's really important that we create, in addition to trust and safety, an environment in which girls have choice and agency over what happens to them, that we make decisions collaboratively. So when we're looking at how do we want to proceed with a treatment and a care plan, we create that plan in collaboration with the girls and with their families. And then finally, we prioritize skill building so that they can be successful. And then the final pillar is that it's strength-based, and that's really linked to the other 2. That means that we understand and value their skills, their knowledge, and their connections, and primarily their potential. Understanding that everybody has potential and that they are co-producers rather than consumers of support. So that's really important. So looking at PACE's, these are PACE's values and guiding principles, and all of the girls that you will see in these slides are our PACE girls, every single one of them. So what do we do and how do we do this? We work at multiple levels. So we work directly with the girls. We also work with communities. And then finally, we work on systems reform. So a lot of the work that I do, so we're at the level of the direct service of working with the girls. You give them a new skill set. They're going to go back into the public schools to be successful. But if those systems and those communities aren't set up to continue to allow them to be successful, then nothing is going to change. So some of the work that I've done primarily is with the Florida legislature and with the Department of Juvenile Justice in changing a system that really was set up to serve as a barrier to their success. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. So how do we work? So these are our 3 different program models. And the primary one that most of you will know are the PACE centers themselves. And we have 21 of those. So a PACE center, you can think of it like a very small school. So there's about 60 to 80 girls that attend each of the 21 PACE centers across the state. Each has 60 to 80 girls, so it's a very small school. Classrooms have about 8 girls in them, so they get very individualized attention. Everybody has a mental health counselor. This is not like a guidance counselor that helps you figure out your academics. It really is somebody that helps you through some of the trauma that you've experienced and helps you to establish a new path. And then, if necessary and needed, they also have access to a therapist. And so when we're working with our girls, we are also working with our families, so that the families have access to counseling and therapy. We do case management, meaning that if they don't have access to food, we help them identify where the food banks are. What are the resources of the community, and how do we support them in accessing everything? So they're very small. Each of the staff not only know the girls' names, but they know their story, they know their history, and they can tell the moment they walk in the door if something's not right. And so, different than a traditional public school, a girl walks in the door, her head is down, her counselor can immediately go over and find out what's wrong. And work with her. And sometimes it's something like, my father was arrested last night. You're not going to be able to be successful in school that day, so they can really help work through that. So that, in all told, we're working with about 2,500 girls through that model. Then about 10 years ago, we realized, so we have one center in each county, each of the 21 counties in which we work. 60 to 80 girls at a time, there's a lot more girls in every county that needs these services. So we began partnering with the public schools and sending our staff into the schools to provide the wraparound services. So we're working in Jacksonville in multiple public schools, providing counseling and mental health counseling and therapy to girls in the public schools. And all told, there we're working with about another 1,000 girls across the state. And that's the model that we're bringing as we expand to other states. So we're partnering with the schools in other states and working directly with girls in the public schools. And then finally, the third model that we provide is what we call our Girls Coordinating Councils. And that's where we work with all of the systems that surround kids. So we're working with we have the school districts at the table, we have child welfare at the table, we have the juvenile judges at the table, we have education at the table, housing, health department, and everybody looks at how are we working with girls in our community, what's missing, what are our gaps, and we begin to do problem solving there. And so regardless of the approach that we're using, and how it's implemented is the same, and it's really providing these comprehensive services at the level of the individual, the community, and then the system, so that we have success at school, at home, and in the community. And we can break these generational cycles of poverty and violence, and we've seen that happen successfully. So speaking of success, what are our outcomes, and how do we measure success? With one of the things that we do is a very extensive data analysis. So we're measuring the baseline of the girls when they're coming to PACE, and then what's happening as a result of PACE, and then how successful they are after PACE. So in our PACE centers, as you can see from this data, prior to coming to PACE, 75% of the girls were failing one or more classes before they came to us. So that's a pretty substantial number if you think about school failure, and it's often more than one. In many cases, the girls simply stop coming to school. They don't feel safe, they're having anxiety or depression, oftentimes they're fearful, and so they stop coming. Or there's disruptive behaviors in the classroom. A lot of our girls have been suspended and many have been expelled. And this behavior, again, is then impacting their ability to be successful in school. 19% of the girls prior to coming to PACE had already been arrested. So they had been involved with the juvenile justice system. And the number one predictor of being involved in the adult corrections system is having been arrested as a child. So if we need to stop this, this pipeline immediately, or these girls are going to end up in the adult correction system. And then 61%, as I said, had been suspended or expelled prior to coming to PACE. So that's, it's a high needs, it's a high risk population. But then if you look at the success, 91% of them improved academically while they were at PACE. That means they advanced grade levels. That means they earned credits. And in many cases, they were able to graduate. 95% had no involvement with the juvenile justice system a year after they left PACE. And so that's, looking at the difference between the 20% who had been arrested prior, that's very significant, and is one of the reasons the legislature has invested so heavily in PACE, is the success of keeping the girls out of that system. And then finally, I think one of the most important statistics is this last one, where 94% are in school or employed a year after they left PACE. So the girls that we're working with are middle and high school aged. So if they're coming to us when they're in middle school, usually their goal is they want to go back into their high school and graduate with their class. So we can help them catch up, we can help them heal this trauma, and they can stay with us, probably about 2 years, and then go back into their public school and be successful. If they're coming to us when they're 16 or 17, oftentimes they're coming to us because they know they don't have enough credits to graduate. So we can help them catch up and earn those credits or get a GED so that they can go on to be successful later in life. So that's the work that we're doing. And most of our girls, after they graduate, are going on to community college, and then many of them are going into the world of work. And we have a very extensive workforce development program, so that we're helping them identify careers, and then we're helping them figure out what's the path to get there. So that's our center model and the data. We also, as I talked about, we have the REACH counseling model where we go into the public schools themselves, and we have 17 counties across 2 states in which we're providing this program. And again, you can see here we're providing social, emotional, behavioral, therapeutic, and mental health counseling to girls and their families. So we primarily do that in schools, but we can also do that in their home. So unlike the center model, we're not providing the academics, but we're providing everything else they need to stay in school. So as you can see from this data, of the girls that we've worked with in the REACH program, 29%, so it's a higher percentage, had involvement with the juvenile justice system, and 81% had behaviors that are associated with delinquency in girls. So meaning that if there isn't an intervention, it's very likely that they will end up being arrested. And as you can see from the data here, as a result of the REACH program, 95% again had no involvement with the juvenile justice system after completing the program, and a year after completing the program, and 99% improved their behavior. So this was 10 years ago, was a pilot program that we started in one county in Fort Lauderdale. And it was very successful, and the legislature invested in it and helped us expand it to 17 counties. So one question that I was asked when prior to starting the talk is, where are we located? Are we just in Jacksonville? So you can see from this visual that we really are all across the state of Florida, so in 21 of our 67 counties. And then working in 2 counties in Georgia, in central Georgia, and now more recently into South Carolina, in 2 counties in South Carolina, as well as in Boston, Massachusetts, we'll be working. So what are some of the policy outcomes? I talked a little bit about working with systems as well as working at the level of the girls and the level of the community. So in Florida, One of the things I know that some of the things that you've been talking about in these meetings is racial equity. So one of the big issues that we see in both the juvenile justice system and in the adult correction system is the disproportionate minority contact, meaning the majority of people who are incarcerated or arrested are people of color. And that holds true for girls as well. So 2/3 of the girls that are arrested are girls of color, mostly Black African-American girls and Latina girls. And they are 2/3 of who are being arrested, and they're also 2/3 of those who end up dropping out of school. So that there's long-term economic dependency challenges as a result. So that's the work that we're doing, is to really help them turn their lives around, and you know that data holds true in who PACE serves. Now, what a PACE center will be reflective of the population of the community it's located in. So, for example, in Jacksonville, it's about 50% white girls and 50% Black girls. In Clay County, we've got a larger number of girls who are white, and we have in our location in Immokalee, Florida, which is where there's a lot of the produce is grown, mostly Latina girls. So it's a very large Hispanic population there. So you can see, and then in Miami, it's a very, very multicultural mix of Black, white, Haitian, Creole, Jamaican, lots of different populations there. And so in addition to the direct service work, we also do the work to influence systems and resources and policies, both at the local level, the state level, and then we've also been working over the last 6 years at the federal level. So I'll give you an example at the local level of some of the work that we do. In Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale, we had a girls coordinating council, and so they took a look at the data and saw that there were a large number of girls who were continuing to be arrested, and they were being arrested for what's called failure to appear. So a child would get arrested for truancy. So they're skipping school, that you can actually be arrested for that. So they'd get arrested for truancy. They'd go into court, they'd see the judge, and the judge would say, okay, you know, you're on probation now, come back in 3 months, and then their trial would be done. Well, they're kids, they're teenagers. They don't remember what's gonna happen in 3 months, so they wouldn't show up. They didn't understand the consequences of not showing up. And in many cases, they either forgot, or they couldn't get transportation, or something else had happened that day, so they didn't really know what to do, and they didn't understand the implications of not showing up. So what would happen is then they wouldn't show up, and then the police would arrest them again. And now with a second arrest, that's a more serious charge. So this is what was happening. And a bunch of our girls were the ones who actually helped do some of this research. And they decided they made a video, which was an animated video about what are the consequences of an arrest. This is what you can expect. This is what will happen. And these are the implications of it. And then they also decided to make, we were originally going to make a pamphlet to hand out to anybody, and they were like, oh no, don't give us a pamphlet, we'll lose that. Give us a little trifold that we can stick into the pocket of our cell phone. We never go anywhere without our cell phones. And so that's what we did, and we translated it into 3 languages, and what it has on it is all the phone numbers for who you need to contact at court, the bus lines and transportation to get to court, and what to do and who to call if you can't show up. And as a result of that, the failure to appear dropped 27% in 1 year. So it had a pretty significant and profound effect on that community. So that's one example of what we're doing at the local level. At the state level, I've worked a lot with the Florida legislature, with the governor's office, and with the Department of Juvenile Justice, and we looked at what were some of the policies that our state had. So I will give you some data that will really shock you. 10 years ago, Florida was arresting 20,000 girls every year. 20,000. So we looked at what were those girls being arrested for. And this also impacts all boys as well. But most of the girls who were arrested and who were incarcerated behind razor wire, not living at home, were there for a misdemeanor offense. And a misdemeanor offense is a slight offense that really, more often than not, doesn't pose any risk to public safety. And so we looked at that and worked with the legislature to change that so that now instead of you can't put a child behind bars for a misdemeanor offense. You also, we worked with law enforcement and they said, we don't have any options if we pick up a child, and so worked with the legislature on creating what's called civil citation. And the civil citation is in lieu of an arrest, law enforcement can say, I don't think this is an offense that really requires this child to be arrested, but this child needs some services. So here's a group of programs that exist in our community. If that child goes to any of those programs and completes them successfully, there will be no arrest and there will be no arrest record. And so that's very significant. And then we also looked at where were these kids being arrested? And the majority of them were being arrested at school. And so really looking what were behaviors that the school just didn't want to deal with versus what was really a behavior or an offense that would warrant a child being arrested. And so that was called zero tolerance legislation. So as a result of all of this legislation and changes that have been made over the last 10 years, we have seen a 60% decrease in the arrest rate of girls in Florida. So now going from 20,000 of being arrested every year to under 6,000. So there's still a long way to go, but it's been quite successful. And then at the federal level, most recently over the last 6 years, PACE has authored legislation that has gone into the federal budget. So that's provided over the last 6 years, over $20 million that's competitively granted to keeping girls out of the juvenile justice system and to preventing human trafficking. So that's been quite successful. We're looking forward to Congress actually passing the budget this year. Hopefully they will do that shortly. So I think one of the most important things is that we're an organization that's really dedicated to social change, and we really do envision a world where all girls and young women have power in a just and equitable society. And why do we focus on these girls and young women? We focus on them because this is the next generation of mothers. This is our next generation of workforce, and this is our next generation of community leaders. So if we can help them be successful, then their children will be successful. And oftentimes people have said to me, how come you don't work with boys? And I tell them every one of those boys had a mother. And if we can help them have a successful mother, then we can also change how our boys are behaving. But our expertise is in girls, and so that's what we focus on and what we continue to do. So that's what PACE does, and I'm happy to take any questions or have a conversation.
Very impressive. Do your employees get specialized training or degrees that they have to work with you?
That's a great question. Yeah, so all of our teachers are credentialed teachers, but they are our employees. So they don't work for the school district, they work for PACE, but they all have the credentialing that's necessary to teach at middle school or high school level. And then all of our counselors are master's level counselors, either in social work or licensed clinical social workers, or a master's degree in therapy.
What is the average age of these girls?
So they're middle and high school, so they're 11 to 17. Generally, the average age, usually where you're seeing the biggest challenge for girls is that transition from middle school to high school. So about 14, 15 is the average age.
This has been fabulous. display of what you all have done. So what can we do for you?
Oh, thank you, that's a great question. So there's a number of things that you can do. I mean, one of the things, pre-COVID, I would have said, volunteering is something and obviously my father had done that for 20 years. He served as the math tutor at Pace Jacksonville for 20 years. And the girls all still call him Mr. Chin. Where's Mr. Chin? But one of the other things that you can do is you can help support the work. So we have a website. It's www.pacecenter.org, where you can make a financial contribution. There's also an advocacy page. So there's often times when there's legislation that we're either supporting or not supporting at the state level. And if you're interested in the advocacy work, then we can contact you via email. And we would actually even give you the script, like here's the legislation that's happening, we support it, here's the reason why, please call your legislator, and here's their number. Because they really do listen to their constituents. And so, if there's an issue that we're supporting and people call, they keep track. They will say, we had 14 phone calls today in support of this bill.
Where does the outside financing go for? What does it use for?
A great question. So we really have a sort of a three-legged stool of our funding. So about half of the funding is legislatively appropriated through the Department of Juvenile Justice as a prevention program. So that line, and we have a line item in the state budget. We also then have a contract with each school district, and the funding, the per pupil funding, follows the girls. So that's the second leg, and then the third leg is private funding that we generate through community support, foundations, corporations, individuals. And then our largest costs are staff, because we've got every girl has 5 teachers. She also has a counselor. And then the facilities themselves, because we either own or lease our own facilities, so each is a standalone location. And then your other costs, transportation, food. We provide breakfast and lunch to every one of our girls. We give them a uniform, so costs of the uniform, student costs are the other primary ones. You're good. Those are fast.
He's one of our better ones. Sounds like many of these young girls have come from broken homes, and maybe their parents came from broken homes. How do you change the pattern? Or do you try?
Yes, we do. And that's exactly the work that we're doing and why we're doing the work. And you're right. It's intergenerational cycles of poverty and violence that you're seeing. And it's their parents experienced it, their parents experienced it, their parents experienced it. And that's why we're working at those 3 different levels. If we're working with the girl at the individual level, we can help her get a new skill set, get new coping skills, understand. We do, classes on everything from substance abuse to how do you get a driver's license? How do you open a bank account? How do you create a household budget so that they can understand how to manage their lives? But we also do work with the families. We do a lot of counseling and classes on mother-daughter conflict. For those of you who had daughters, sometimes they can be challenging to raise. And so there's a lot of work that often has to be done on mother-daughter conflict. And then also the systems themselves. If we can help systems keep kids out of being arrested, they're much more likely to be successful later in life than if they continue to cycle through that.
How about marriage choices?
Most of our girls aren't thinking about that yet at this age. They're 11 to 17. But we do a lot of work around self-empowerment, self-efficacy, and self-advocacy. A lot of times, I'll have legislators who will call me and say, okay, I'm embarrassed to ask you this, but what kind of sex education are you giving them? And I always say that sex education is 90% above the neck. And it's all about understanding that the girls need to respect themselves. They need to understand that people need to respect them, and that they have choices, and that they need to make good choices. And so that's how we're working there. And it really is about helping them understand that having a child early in life is not going to help you be successful. We have a program in which we have, it's called Baby Can Wait, and we have these little anatomically correct babies that are programmed so that you have to feed them, and you have to change them, and you can't leave them, and they take them home for the weekend. And they come back on Monday morning and can't wait to get it back. They're like, Miss, my baby cried all weekend. And so that's a very successful program and really helping. This is what it's really like, and this isn't something that you're ready for.
Is there follow-up after graduation to continue to follow them? I know you say you empower them. The other question I was wondering about is, are they only girls who have been incarcerated, or are there other girls that have this opportunity as well?
Okay,
Two questions.
two great questions. So on the first one, we do follow them. So we have what's called transition services. So once a girl leaves, we follow her for 3 years to make sure that she's being successful.
3 years?
3 years. So, for example, if the girl came to us in middle school and then after 2 years she went back into her public school, we'll go and meet with her at the school to make sure that she's still on track with all her goals, she's being successful in school, or is there anything she needs. And we have a saying at PACE, once a PACE girl, always a PACE girl. And so some of our girls will come back to us years and years later. Say, for example, they're getting ready to go to college and they don't know how, they need help filling out the financial aid forms. So we provide that kind of help and support. We've had girls going to college who didn't have money to buy their books, so we'll help them with that. And then, I forgot your second question already.
They're girls that are not incarcerated.
Oh, yeah, so 20% of girls have a prior charge, so 80% have not, but they all have what are called risk factors that are associated with delinquency. So contractually, because we're a prevention program for juvenile justice, all of the girls that we're working with have at least 3 of the 5 risk factors for delinquency.
Who recommends them being involved in the program? Teachers, et cetera?
Yeah, so our primary referral source is the schools themselves. So the school counselor is saying, this girl, she stopped coming to school or she's having behavior issues. So the school will refer her. But one of the largest referrals or self-referrals of our family is, we're fairly well known in the community, so girls will tell their friends, I went there, or my sister went there. Parents will also, and it's all voluntary. Nobody's court-ordered to attend PACE. So, they come because they want to be there. The first day they don't all come skipping into school, happy to be there. There's often a lot of resistance, but usually after the first month, they want to be there and they want to stay. One of the other referral sources, so law enforcement can make a referral, as well as juvenile judges can make a referral.
How much of the need do you have capacity to serve?
Please wait for the microphone so we can hear the question.
I'll repeat it. She asked how much of the need do we have capacity to serve. And that's a great question because we have a waiting list, usually at any given time, of about 300 to 400 girls who are waiting to attend. We have a limited number of spaces at each of the started the REACH program where we can partner with the schools. So that's really helped increase the capacity. But again, we can't be in every school. So you know, there's actually a really large need, and especially now during this time of COVID, the mental health needs of kids is really extraordinary. Lots of trauma just from being isolated, you know, from fear too. The fear of getting sick, the fear of their family getting sick, and then the isolation that they experience.
Is this a program that is unique to Florida, or is it in other states?
Well, it's in other states now, but because of us. So it is unique to Florida.
Are you doing it in other states?
Yes. So we're doing it in Georgia now, and we're just about to do it in South Carolina and in Massachusetts.
Now, when you do it there, how do you, are you working in the legislatures in all those states?
We're working in Georgia. We received funding from the federal government for Georgia, and then we're working through the district attorney's office there in terms of generating the resources. In South Carolina, it was through the South Carolina legislature that appropriated the resources. And then in Boston, Massachusetts, it's a private foundation that's funding the work.
Well, it's such an impressive program that you have. Are there other programs like it in the other states in America?
You know, there's really not anything as comprehensive as PACE. There are other organizations that work with girls. There's, you know, boys and girls clubs, but none that works with this population specifically, and really at a statewide level.
That was kind of my question. Are there any programs for boys similar to this?
There's a program called Associated Marine Institutes that really based off of the PACE model started working specifically with boys. I know they have one in Clay County. I think they have one in the Tampa Bay area also.
Okay. I think what was my question? Forgot it.
Mary,
Oh, yeah, okay, I got it. Has the current events that are going on in the country today, critical race theory, the other things, social issues going on, has that had any impact on your program?
It certainly has for a number of reasons. I mean, one, about 40% of our staff are of color, and about 2/3 of our girls are girls of color. So certainly, you know, the social unrest, the looking at the racial equity issues has been important. So we developed some curriculum that's through Martin Luther King Center on looking at what's called social circles, and it's a way to have a conversation. So girls, it's a directed conversation that the girls are having with each other, directed by our staff, and then we also have them for our staff, in which they're facilitated conversations. Critical race theory is something that's taught at universities. It's not something that's taught in K-12. So we don't teach critical race theory, but we do teach history. And it's important to teach history that's accurate.
Mary, I was going to ask you the really big picture. Are we winning in a total sense of saving lives among girls?
It depends on what you mean by winning. So I don't know if you all know the starfish story. A man walking on the beach and saw there's all these starfish on the beach, and a young girl picking them up one at a time and throwing them back in. And he says, "You can't save them all." And she says, "No, but I saved that one." So that we can do. In that sense, we're winning, but societally, we're not. We're not. There's still so much inequity, you know, in terms of both race and gender. You know, women are still not paid at the same rate as men, and that's an even lower rate for women of color. You look at the inequities that the pandemic really helped to surface. That, you know, for people, myself included, more white collar jobs, you could do them from home. but not your blue collar jobs, you couldn't. So, I think that we still have a lot of work to do. But the importance of continuing to save one at a time matters, and it makes a difference. And if you see you're looking at an arrest rate of 20,000 girls a year to under 6, that's made a difference.
Mary, other than teaching, do you have any other volunteer opportunities, such as helping to serve meals or anything like that?
I mean, pre-pandemic, we did. We had lots of opportunities. It's everything from one-day events to helping with some of the, the fundraisers. One of the large, I know that Joan Granger has donated clothing to each one of our centers, has a clothes closet. And those types of things we can continue to do, because we can collect it from you. But right now, we're not having any visitors into the centers. And it's unfortunate because we had a very powerful volunteer force.
Do you have dropouts from your program, or they're pretty much competing once they're starting?
That's a really good question. We do have dropouts, and we usually see the girls that decide to leave because it's voluntary. They will leave in the first 90 days. And when we look at the data, it's about 25% of them make the decision not to stay. And some of the reason is we're asking them to do really hard work. We're asking them to look at things that they may not be ready to look at. And we've had girls who have left and then they came back and they said, I wasn't ready then, but I'm ready now. And as well as, girls who are not successful. I mean, we have some very successful PACE girls. I mean, one of our girls who graduated from our center in Orlando then graduated from UCF and then graduated from Vermont Law School. She's now an attorney in Seattle and she's running for Congress. We have another one who in our Ocala Center who graduated from UF and then went to Boston College and got her PhD, and she's now a research fellow at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So it's very successful girls, but we've also had girls that are not so successful. I don't know if any of you have heard of the organization in Jacksonville called Refreaded that works with victims of sex trafficking. And so these are all adult women, and we did a project with them where they made masks for us for when all of our girls came back. We could give them all a mask. And one of the women who was leading the project was a former PACE girl. And so I said to her, so we were not successful with you. I mean, you ended up being trafficked. And she said, no, you were successful with me because if it hadn't been for what I learned at PACE, I wouldn't have been able to get out. So it depends on how you define that.
Where is the PACE facility in Jacksonville?
In Jacksonville, so the question is, where's the PACE facility in Jacksonville? In Jacksonville, we're located directly across the street from JU, so on University Boulevard, right across from JU. And it's the Thompson Weaver Center, so Dolores Barr Weaver was the chair of the capital campaign to build that building, and Mildred Thompson, who ran Dandy Foods, is the one who donated the land.
Mary, this has been so enlightening and so wonderful to have you here, and you've given us tons of information. I want to add one little thought. My husband and I do some mission work in the Dominican Republic, and when you mentioned volunteering is a possibility. And we believe in the Dominican Republic that no one is ever too old to volunteer. Though in general there, the grandmothers, for example, are a little bit younger than our population. There's always a place for a grandmother or a grandfather, you'd probably be more interested in the grandmothers, who can talk from a position of wisdom, what they've learned, throughout life. So I would encourage anyone, it's not very far away. It would be wonderful if we could get some people to come and meet with these young women as older role models, shall we say.
No, I think it's a fabulous idea because intergenerational experiences they're good for both.
Well, they are, and sometimes these children may have been abused at home, so associate mother and father with their home life and not so much grandmothers. But anyway, this has been an extraordinary program. I'm sorry Bob had to miss it. He'll get to later.
Someone who has a comment here, right here.
Okay.
Mary, thanks so much. We really enjoyed it.
Before I love to hear it again. That's wonderful. Look, I just wanted to say that, this has been one of the great things about bringing people in from the outside. We all consider ourselves a little bit inmates. We're kind of here, especially during COVID. So when we have visitors come in, we welcome everybody, every point of view, every opinion, just every outlook on life. We have learned so much by people being willing to come and see us. So please, let's give her a big hand of applause. Welcome to come up and talk to her personally if you wish. They don't want to leave.